right, so hi everyone, my name is Dan Permiani and I'm going to be walking you through one of my lesson plans that I constructed for my unit. The unit topic was the different text features that pop up in both literary and informational texts. And so for this particular lesson, the subject or topic area would be order and sequence of events. So the manner in which the events of the story transpire. This is a 5th grade level lesson. The setting would actually be the general education classroom. My class was 21 students, of which 17 did not have any accommodations or modifications to their educational planning. I had originally 4 students with IEPs, but 2 eventually transitioned out of the special education program. But I did still have 2 students with IEPs and 2 with 504 plans. The resource setting, basically the manner in which the class would transpire would be a combination of whole group instruction, cooperative learning structures, and independent practice. Now, just to go through the context for the class and give you some background on where this lesson is coming from and what the focus would be. What do students already know that is relevant to this activity, or what skills do they already have and how do you know it? So at this point, this particular lesson that I'm going to be going over, this would transpire later in the week, probably Wednesday or Thursday. If the lesson were to start on the Monday, this would be the reteach section of the week that students have at this point been introduced to the material. They've interacted within it in a variety of ways through small group instruction, peer-to-peer interactions, and independent practice. Learning has been supplemented through help from the teaching paraprofessional, and students, at this point should possess at least a fairly concrete understanding of the topic of sequencing and order of events. At this point, they've had an introduction day in which the students are introduced to the topic, and there's a heavy amount of teacher modeling in that introduction day. To walk them through, it's that gradual release of learning from which the teacher kind of leads the way, the I do, we do, you do, that after the teacher models, then the students work with the teacher and then eventually get some independent practice on that first day. The second day would be strongly centered on instructional literacy centers with 3 different rotations. And that's to provide students with both independent practice, a partner activity where they work one-on-one with a partner, and also within the context of a small group where they're getting further reinforced. At that point, the nice thing about that literacy center day is that the class would be broken into essentially 3 groups of a high performing, sort of the average performing, and the lower performing. Now, in my setting, in my school, the class would skew towards the lower end of performance. So with that in mind, the high performers, you might see a lot of variation within that group, where you have some students who might be just around like the average performance level for 5th grade to well above average, and then the lower performing groups, the 2 other groups, you can specialize a little bit more in what you're trying to target at those areas. The lowest performing group would almost exclusively consist of my students with who are designated ELL, or my students with the IEPs. Now, throughout these lessons, the teacher is going to be utilizing high-level academic language throughout the week to instill within students the meaningful and relevant terminology that will affect their ability to discuss the topic, and students, at this point should be excited to continue developing their understanding of the topic. There are multiple opportunities for the students to be interact and be successful within this material. And, you know, offering students those opportunities builds up their confidence, and when you're you know, engaging them with high level academic language, you're teaching them the language that teachers use, they're going to start using it themselves, you know, as they get more confident in their own abilities. Now, let me scroll down a little bit. At this point in the lesson, the primary challenging factor will be the continued gradual release of responsibility from the teacher to the student. Cooperative structures allow for student interdependence and reliability on completing assignments, and teacher-led instruction maintains the bulk of responsibility not on the student but on the teacher. At this point in the week, we really want to start transferring more and more of that accountability to the student for their learning. You know, at this point, I'd be collecting more official and reflective assessment data. You know, that introduction data, maybe that's collected through whatever assignments are assigned over those first 2 initial days. There's so much teacher modeling and assistance that, you know, it's hard to truly gauge where the students are at this point in the week. And then the ensuing day, which would be the assessment day, you would definitely want to start wheeling back what amount of help you're giving to students, and allow them to really, you know, reflect what their own ability is. Informal assessment data is collected through classroom observations, analysis of student cooperative structural materials, and guided practice is helpful, but, you know, the more meaningful data that is truly reflective of an individual's achievement level is collected through formal assessment, which would transpire on the last day of the week, on that Friday. So if the lesson's being introduced on Monday is an introduction, Tuesday is a small group reinforcement lesson, Wednesday is a kind of a cooperative learning structure, a little bit more whole group, but still fairly you know, cooperative, of a collaborative approach with smaller groups of students. Thursday would be typically a review day, really to drive home those big points, and then Friday would be your assessment day. Now, for the students with IEPs in my classroom, I would instill differentiated instruction, accommodations, and assignment modifications so as to adequately provide a level academic playing field. During the independent work session, students with IEPs will receive assistance from the lead teacher, as well as being shadowed by the class paraprofessional who can step in and assist on an as-needed basis. Additional aid from the grade level special education teacher may be provided as well if and when necessary or available. You know, I think in terms of, you know, that background, you know, it's you know, the nature of a lot of these activities, the collaborative structure does tend to modify the level of rigor, which is great because it allows students to proceed at a pace that they're comfortable with. And then having the ability to, you know, transition a lot of that responsibility for leading the class to the students would free up myself and my my classroom para to walk around and really shadow and help those students with IEPs, you know, should they need the assistance. You know, in this particular activity, there's definitely room where there's gonna be a lot of ability for students to help each other throughout the lesson. Now, just to give you a little additional context, I know this is a lot of context to give, but, you know, I think it's important to understand the background of my students. In my classroom, there are 2 students who currently have IEPs, and they will be referred to as student A and student B. Student A was a 11-year-old boy who was diagnosed with a specific learning disability in written expression, while student B was a 10-year-old girl who was diagnosed with a specific learning disability, reading comprehension, written expression, and mental processing. Now, while student A has demonstrated approximate grade level ability to answer questions orally, and he has demonstrated that he can verbally build arguments while citing facts and background knowledge, student A's ability to express these concepts in written form is below grade, would be considered below grade level per both Imagine Learning Data, which is a supplemental online program that we use, and informal teacher assessment via McGraw-Hill's informal reading inventory. His written expression skills are at a 2nd grade level according to that measure. Now, this will be taken into account in today's lesson, given its focus on written expression. Today, this particular lesson would have a heavy focus on student writing, and therefore student A would receive appropriate accommodations and assignment modifications so as to promote success. He would be provided with both graphic organizers, word lists, sentence starters to help him develop written responses and initiate the writing process. Just to give you even a little more context, with working with this particular student, a lot of times it wasn't so much the coming up with the answer, it was figuring out how to write it down. So something as simple as just a sentence frame, like I think that, and then fill in the blank, would really help the student formulate his written response. So in that particular case, the accommodations don't need to be that extreme. There was a sense of fatigue that would often set in with writing, longer term handwriting. But the nice thing about this particular day would be that students would be finishing with a typed response, and that prevents, the typing aspect prevents a lot of that fatigue that result from writing. In terms of behavioral supports, that was something that I dealt with throughout my year in my classroom. Preferential seating near the teacher and away from distractions necessary. Now, near the teacher that's an interesting idea, because one of the best practices to kind of work your way throughout the room, not to stand in one place, but to move generally around the classroom. So generally that should be more, in front of the classroom, that the student is towards the front of the classroom, not the back, away from distractions. That could be other students, that could be, the window, it could be looking out in the hallway. This student has been diagnosed with ADHD and a generalized anxiety disorder. Therefore, consistent modeling of expected behavior, positive reinforcement when the student displays those appropriate behaviors, and maintaining consistency for all students is necessary to promote positive student outcomes. Now, student B had been diagnosed with an specific learning disability, and she had difficulties with reading comprehension, written expression, and processing new information. Although she had shown that she's capable of performing the necessary skills to decode unknown words in a vacuum, when those words were presented to her simply just as a word on the page, she'd be able to sound it out. As well as construct grammatically and materially correct sentences with teacher supervision. A lot of those, she struggled to perform those tasks, when faced with new material or without, that direct teacher support. For her to be successful in this particular activity, there were a fairly substantial amount of modifications to the assignment, and to allow ample time for her to develop her written responses. One of the big things for this particular student as well is that, given that English was not her primary language, she would greatly benefit from the use of visuals to support teacher instruction, which you'll see I have worked in throughout the instructional part of this lesson, as well as the teacher highlighting cognates that connect English words to her native language in Spanish. These accommodations help her access and progress in the general education curriculum. As such, just like student A, she'll be provided with graphic organizers to help her organize her thoughts, as well as appropriate sentence frames so as to help her structure her responses. Chunking down the student's work was also something that would need to be taken into account. Now, just to move on to the next section, in terms of the standards that will be addressed by this activity, I narrowed it down to 4 or 3. Are there more than that? Yes, but these are the 3 that I would, specifically be focusing on. There's, many times there's standards and ideas that pop up, throughout the context, throughout the course of the lesson. I think if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, you're addressing, a dozen standards a day. A lesson, but these are the 3 that we're explicitly focusing on, that we've constructed activities specifically focusing on these 3, and those are standard W52, which is students will write informative and explanatory text to examine the topic and convey ideas and information clearly. Standard SO51 Students will engage effectively in the range of collaborative discussions, one-on-one in groups and teacher-led with diverse partners on grade level topics and texts, and standard L56, which is acquire and use grade appropriate general academic and domain-specific words and phrases, including those that signal contrast, addition, and other logical relationships. So, in essence, we're going to get to these objectives again in just a little bit, but students are being able to write about a topic and convey ideas and information clearly. They are engaging in cooperative learning structures effectively, whether that be one-on-one, in groups, teacher-led, with a mix of partners on the grade level topics and texts. And the last part is that they're using the relevant language for the lesson appropriately, that they're picking up the necessary academic language to be successful. In terms of what open-ended questions will be used to stimulate student interest and thinking, at the beginning of the week, one of the essential questions that came up was what came first. That would be something that would be posted on that Monday. As a form of basically to start the day. It was it would appear on a KWL chart. Students would share their different ideas, and it would be an introduction to the topic of sequencing, and the idea of one thing happening after the other as a result of the other. How do things connect to each other in a logical manner? At this point in the week, students will have reflected on this question multiple times. This question of what comes first, used as a class opener, will have happened on Monday, on Tuesday. They've engaged in the same question multiple times, and they've interacted with their peers on the concept of sequencing and order of events. Now, in terms of the objectives, describe the activity's objectives and desired outcomes in terms of what the students will know and be able to do at the conclusion of the activity. Now, this is in relation to standard W52, given appropriate sentence starters, I can summarize a text through usage of a word processor. The what are they going to do? They can summarize a text. How are they going to do it? They're going to be given appropriate sentence starters, and they're going to use a word processor. 5.1, engage effectively in a range of collaborative discussions. In the context of whole group and cooperative group interactions, I can correctly utilize grade level academic vocabulary in my answers and responses. Actually, whoops, that one was connected to 5.6, acquire and use grade appropriate general academic and domain specific words. In the context of whole group and cooperative group interactions, I can correctly utilize grade level academic vocabulary in my answers and responses. Where are they going to do it? Whole group and cooperative group interactions. What are they going to do? They're going to be able to use grade level, grade level vocabulary in their answers and responses. And the last one, which would be connecting to SL51, in the context of a cooperative activity, I can interact with my peers in an appropriate manner as laid out by normative behavior expectations. Now, that would be something, behavior expectations are something that you reinforce every single day. They obviously receive a heavy dosage at the beginning of the year, but you're constantly reinforcing appropriate behavior in the classroom. In the context of a cooperative activity, there's that back and forth of interacting, receiving, interacting, receiving. I can interact with my peers in an appropriate manner. So students at this point have been given the tools and the structures which they will need. As a teacher, you would be observing their ability to actually to participate in those activities, in the way that they have been modeled and have been shown how they should unfold. Now, in terms of measuring success, how have I determined levels of relevant student knowledge before the activity, and how I measure it during and after, how I provide feedback, how do my assessments align with their needs. There's a lot that goes into measuring success. At this point in the week, the teacher, we have a rough estimate of student understanding of the topic. given their performance in small group instruction, independent guided practice, and cooperative learning structures. We tying in your review of past student summative testing data, whether that be, as I mentioned before, our Imagine Learning platform, which is something that our students would use every day, which would allow me to have a very up-to-date kind of look at where they're at. Map data, which is relevant typically more closely to right after the assessment, but it's still good to look back at. I could be able to draw out some comments and understands about the relative learned knowledge, background knowledge in regard to the topic. Feedback will be provided on a peer-to-peer basis as students complete a graphic organizer together to sequence the events of the story in a rally coach cooperative activity, in which one student serves as a teacher and the other serves as a student. This is that transition, that guided release of responsibility. This would allow me to walk around the room to monitor these interactions. The students will be driving the learning forward, but I'll be able to walk around, observe, and then give feedback as needed. And that's one of the great things about cooperative learning structures. It kind of frees the teacher up to be an observer rather than have to be the instructor. And it allows me to provide feedback more immediately than otherwise. Students will frequently check in with the teacher during the individual practice portion of the period, and they will receive meaningful qualitative feedback in regard to their work directly from the teacher. The teacher will highlight positive student performance, that it will, when they're showing me their work, I will be able to be giving back focused, meaningful feedback, not just, oh, nice job, good work. No, it doesn't stop at that. You need to be specific, provide cues and follow-up questions to further develop their line of thinking. That's key to driving student understanding forward. Per student A's IEP accommodations, this would be, the assessment accommodations and how my assignments align. How am I, making this, this lesson accessible to my students with IEPs? He'll be provided with a word processor, Google Docs, to enable him to type out his answers, both during the peer-to-peer cooperative structure and during the independent practice time. All students will be provided with general sentence frames, but student A and B both will be provided with a list of keywords and phrases to assist them in writing responses to questions. The general sentence frame for the whole class might be, I think that, fill in the blank. For student A and student B, it might be a little more in depth, that the words and phrases they're given might be giving them just a little bit more direction. It might, frame the thinking, this character is important because of blank, it's giving them just a little more structure of what's being expected and what's being asked of them. When available, the teacher will read the problems for both students. If the teacher isn't available, the students will be assisted by the paraprofessional and will help them further develop their own ideas. A lot of times, it can be something as simple as reading the questions out loud, allowing that, the auditorial, bouncing back and forth, that they're speaking, interacting within the question can spark a lot of thinking for both student A and student B. Student growth is going to be determined by the ability to accurately complete the assignments and an analysis of the work on the independent practice, which will be held to a student-created rubric, which measures content clarity and purpose. I think it's a great practice to have students create their own grading rubrics. It makes a huge difference for the student to feel like they're being graded fairly. And if they are the ones that create the rubric, I think it really helps drive that sense for it. It allows them to take so much more responsibility, and it allows them to, it really self-motivates students to perform when they set the scale for their own success. Grading focus will be placed on the chronological nature of the student responses, not necessarily the grammar or spelling, given that the focus of the lesson is on text structure. So, when grading and taking a look at student written responses, the focus, yes, you care about spelling and grammar, but this isn't about spelling and grammar. This lesson is not about spelling and grammar. This lesson is about sequencing. It's about the sequence of events. It's about order. You know, you want to make sure that that's what you're assessing, that you're focusing on that particular skill. Now, finally, we get into this part. How will the activity unfold from beginning to end? What's its timing and pacing? How the activity will provide opportunities for deeper, higher level thinking and learning. So, the lesson will commence with a short recap of the previous day's activities, group literacy centers, and how they tied into the topic of the week, which would be sequencing and order of events. This portion of the period will be direct instruction via the teacher, asking students questions, while also writing the day's learning objectives on the board. Once that is complete, teacher will share with the class how the day will unfold, what the students should expect, and what activities they will complete over the course of the period. Total time, it's less than 5 minutes. You know, you're cramming in a recap of the previous day while you are also kind of introducing what students should expect for the day. You know, you're making a timeline. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. You know, what did we do yesterday? We did this, this, and this. Why is this important? You know, those are the standards that get written on the board. We are doing this because this, you know, students benefit from, you know, having that clear representation of why they're doing what they're doing. I think it really helps drive their understanding. So, you know, that's the first, you know, just about 5 minutes of the class, you're explicitly telling the students what they are doing and why they are doing it. At this point, the teacher will have the class book managers distribute textbooks. We use the Wonders textbook series from McGraw-Hill, and the students will open up to the given page to view the reading. The teacher will utilize the online curriculum portion of the activity so as to project the reading on the board, as well as use the auto read function so as to provide a clearly enunciated form of the reading. I've, in the past, in years past, dabbled with having students, you know, popcorn read, having students round robin read, you know, read in small groups. You know, for this particular activity, it's best to model the initial reading with, you know, the computer reading it clearly at a steady pace. Students have the visual depiction of the reading on the board with the illustrations from the reading that they can follow along. You know, the nice thing about the online portion of our textbook series is that as each word is read, it highlights on the board. So students, you know, who maybe are still learning English, they're seeing the words highlighted as they're read aloud. You know, really helping reinforce, you know, what those connections. The teacher will explain that they're going to listen to the first section of the story together and then identify the sequence of events in the narrative through the Kagan activity showdown, which will be completed as a table group. The teacher will have the program read the first paragraph of the story and will pause to ask the following question: who is the main character of this story, and what is the first thing that happens in the story? Give the tables about 30 to 45 seconds to create their response. Student responses, I did not mention. Oh, here it is. They will collaborate in table groups to develop their answers and show their answers on distributed miniature whiteboards. Each table I would have about 7 tables set up in the classroom with 3 to 4 students at each. And the students would, you know, formulate their answer to the question, who is the main character of the paragraph, and what is the first thing that happens in the story. They have to identify the main character, identify what is sequentially what is the first thing that happens in the story. Teacher will provide direct feedback on student responses and reaffirm the sequence of events in the story. You know, students would be talking to each other to making sure that they have the right answer. You know, fairly immediately, we're already giving a little responsibility to the students. You know, I'm not telling them what happened. They need to figure it out. Once they show me, I can correct them or say, you know, great, good job. You know, that's exactly right. That's the main character. That's what they're doing. Or, yeah, you might want to take a second look at that. Think about what they're doing before that or after that. The process will repeat for the second and third paragraphs until the end of the first section of the story. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. You know, at this point, you know, we're getting the students' minds activated. You know, just making sure that just slowly getting back in the groove of reading, identifying, you know, important information, key events. You know, they take, what they've read or what they've listened to, restate it as a statement. At this point, the teacher will explain that they are still going to listen to the second section of the story, but they will now complete a self-made graphic organizer that will sequence out the events of the reading. Students with IEPs will be provided with a hard copy of this organizer. Partners are going to be assigned via face partner at the respective table. If you have 4 kids sitting at a table, it's a partner directly across from you. Or in groups of 3 if they have an odd number of students at their table. Teacher will play the next paragraph of the story. So we're going to be going paragraph by paragraph. Still at this point, the story is being read out loud to the class. It's being projected on the board. Students will write the next event of the story in their graphic organizers, talking to their partner, making sure that they have the right character, the right setting, event sequence. You repeat this 2 or 3 more times until the end of the section of the story. It's about 10 to 15 minutes. So you're looking at, probably 4 to 5 paragraphs. So that's 4 to 5 boxes in their graphic organizer that they're going to be completing with a partner. The first part was their small table group, so maybe 4 students. Second part, you're talking with a partner. Final section of the story will be completed as independent practice with the students listening to the story, filling out their own graphic organizers, and subsequently typing their reflections on Google Docs to later share with the teacher. The students will only need to type the sequence of events for the final portion of the story. They will be provided with sentence frames to help structure their thinking. Before students begin typing, they're to bring their complete graphic organizer to the teacher so the teacher can provide feedback on the strengths of their writing, maybe focus on how they've highlighted character purpose, and provide concrete suggestions for how to better the reflection. So this last section, you have a couple more boxes in their graphic organizer to finish. They have the reading at their desk, but they're also viewing it on the board. They listen to the story, and they're finishing out, the last couple of events of the story. Before they begin typing, bring it to the teacher. Allow me to provide concrete feedback. Paraprofessionals, another resource. Bring it to them. Have them provide concrete feedback on what they did well, what they need to do. At this point, after, should they have completed that final section of not only getting their work checked by the teacher or para, but also typing it, students who complete the final portion will assist the teacher and class paraprofessional in proofreading peer work, providing feedback on ways to improve student writing and reflection. And now, the reason I incorporate this is that, within my classroom, and I think within any classroom, there's always a great deal of variability in student work speed. And this way, you're allowing students who complete, their work quickly. You're thrusting them into the role of teacher, allowing them to work with others, work with their peers, provide maybe that high-level language that they have that maybe their peers don't, and they're working collaboratively. Students have been taught how to help each other in a manner which still maintains the fidelity of individual work. It does not result in students simply giving each other answers. That's something that, we definitely practice early on in the year. There's a difference between helping and just telling. So at this point in the year, at this point in the year, students would be well aware of how to help rather than tell. Having students help each other will allow the teacher and paraprofessional to focus more heavily on students with more intensive needs. So, that's another reason is that, there's a difference between the student who is just kind of lagging and the student who actually really needs help. In one case, I think it'd be better set if the teacher would be able to help the student with more intensive needs rather than helping a student who's just kind of dragging their feet. That's why you have, student teachers at the little student helpers. Once they finish their own work, they can help those who just need a little extra push. Now, to conclude this period, the class will reconvene at their table, and the teacher will pose the following question for students to discuss with their cooperative table groups. What was the sequence of events in the final section of the story? Were there any differences between what you and your partner found? So you would sit back down, each student would talk with their face partner and see whether or not there were any differences between what the events that they thought were important. Students will compare and contrast their findings with one another in a round-robin fashion, with each student getting around 30 seconds of initial share time and then 30 seconds of comment time. So it would be about 5 minutes. Following this discussion, The teacher will bring attention to the front of the classroom, write out on the board the purpose of the next day's class time, review the whole week's material, and prepare students for the coming exam on the following day. Exit ticket for the day would be a show of thumbs, up, down, or to the side to indicate student comfort with the day's lesson. On sequencing order of events, thumbs up if they're comfortable with the idea, to the side if they're not entirely sure yet, and down if they still don't understand. Students would have their heads down and eyes closed, so as to encourage accurate representation of self-evaluation. I have found that this actually is, as simple as it is, my students were always fairly honest. I think that comes from, myself as their teacher being very honest about, when things confuse me, or, creating a culture and a community sense that it's okay to put yourself out there and to acknowledge, areas of weakness or areas of strength. So, something as simple as having students put their heads down and eyes closed, and then show me, thumbs up if I feel good, thumbs aside if I'm almost there, thumbs down if I don't even know what's going on. It's students were very honest about that, and it, keeping it light, keeping it, giving them that middle ground. A lot of times, students would take that they'd be honest about, Mr. Dan, I sort of get it, but I'm still not sure. The importance of this, I would jot down those students who are still not sure or are really lost, jot those names down. The next day, in that review day, really pull those students aside and do one more, small group intervention with just those students, while the other students work on a project together. Instructional strategies and reflecting on what I do, how that fits in with best practice. Why were these ideas selected? Students will be engaged in whole group, small group, and independent learning settings, and will be given multiple opportunities to practice the skill of the week, sequencing order of events in a variety of activities and settings. Cooperative learning structures sprinkled throughout the day allow students to build understanding and off of one another's knowledge as they develop new understandings of the topic, while the individual practice will allow students to engage in the material independently. Direct teacher feedback is provided in a variety of formats, and it's meaningful. Students will be engaged throughout the lesson and participating, as the teacher will utilize cooperative structures and incentives to promote student interest. All activities are educationally based, reinforce the skill of the week. Usage of the visual presentation of the reading on the board and the use of the audio function will take some of the pressure off of students having to complete the whole reading themselves while still engaging them in the activity. What are the opportunities that will be provided for students to apply the knowledge? They're provided numerous opportunities. They have the opportunity to work independently with a partner with the confines of a small group. During independent practice, they will utilize sentence frames and prompts to create summary sentences of the events, the sequence out the events of the story. They will they've been taught the difference between quoting from a text and summarizing a text, and they'll show their complete work to the teacher to receive direct, meaningful feedback. In small group activity, and that showdown activity, the group will work together to identify the proper sequence of events through discussion. They're talking back and forth, writing down their answer, and then receiving feedback. In the pure cooperative structure, students will work together to accurately fill out a sequencing graphic organizer that highlights the events in the middle of the reading. Now, as you can see, there's a huge focus in this lesson. It's cooperative learning. It's all it is. It's students working together. That's kind of the teaching methodology of the school I work at. It's not about it's not all on the teacher. It's on the students. It's putting them as drivers of their own learning. And so that being said, there's a heavy focus on students working through stuff themselves. Accommodations, adaptations, technology. What does that look like in my classroom? Student A will be allowed to use a Chromebook throughout the class. Student A and B will both be provided with a plethora of sentence starters and guidance on how to best utilize these prompts. Teacher will utilize a whiteboard as a means to display learning objectives for the lesson, as well as display the reading and project the audio. students' performance data, how am I tracking it? It's going to be tracked on a created spreadsheet and later be able to display graphically once enough data has been collected relevant to the lesson. How have I personalized learning? Using Kagan cooperative structures, using round robin, rally coach, showdown, all these structures that what was the last one? I always forget the last one. No, it was rally robin, or round robin. Using these structures that there's a set order of students, A responding, B responding, C responding, D responding, back and around, and it forms structure, it forms uniformity, and it forms ability and competence in the students. So these are those cooperative structures. You cannot overstress their importance. That allows students to progress at their own pace in the manner which they are comfortable, most comfortable, and allows them to utilize each other as a means to further their understanding of a particular topic. Whether resources necessary for this activity. Obviously, you need pencils, paper, their textbook, the necessary sentence prompts, and word processors, so their Chromebooks. And, it's a fairly limited resource set. I guess not mentioned in here also is the whiteboards and markers they use for Showdown, and the teacher the larger whiteboard and the projector as well. So everything you find in general classroom, nothing too crazy, but these are the resources needed. The learning environment, just to quickly give you a rundown of what that would look like. Students would be seated at their respective desks for the majority of the period, and they would come to the teacher's podium to ask questions during the independent work session or show the teacher their work. Students who have earned enough behavioral points, that's something we set up, incentives, may quote unquote purchase the right to sit on the carpet or at the library couch area during the independent work session. But for the most part, when they're working in cooperative groups, either with their partner or with their small group, they're at their desk with their group or with their partner. Behavior and activity expectations are set at the start of class. They're always restated basically at the beginning and ending of every lesson. The teacher will assign 2 student police officers who will proctor the independent work session on a as determined basis. Students, basically just walk around, check each other's work, and report back to the teacher if students are off task, which would allow me to address those issues at a later time. I believe strongly that student behavior, it's almost does more harm than good when you call out a student in front of their classmates. That it's better to pull them aside, during work time and address them one-on-one about some of the choices they were making. Students who fail to repeatedly fail to meet behavior expectations or who cause an overwhelming distraction may be pulled from the classroom to the hallway to the grade level SES officer, a student emotional support officer, until they are prepared to return to the class and work quietly. If the SES officer is not available, the student will be monitored by the classroom paraprofessional until the SES officer can address the situation. Now, there weren't an overwhelming amount of instances this year of students needing that heavy level of intervention. Last year, there were a few more incidents. In my previous occupation, I worked at an alternative school. This was every day and every minute of every day. But I think you're addressing distractions as they happen in the moment. You're providing immediate interactions and interventions to those behavior problems. You're not letting them slide. You're not letting them just go unchecked. You're immediately making sure that the student's in the right mental space and emotional space to be successful. If the student begins making a habit of trying to get out of the work by acting out, they will be assigned to work on their laptop from a separate setting, most likely in the offices of the SES officer or alongside the class paraprofessional, and communication will be made with the students' parents and guardians to address the situation. That did happen this year, where students, really uncomfortable with trying to do English with their English class, with their English work. Maybe I can, sneak out of class if I just keep on acting out. I don't have to do work. No, if that is something, a repeated pattern, students are going to have to do their work on their own in the SES officer's classroom. You know, generally this isn't the case because when students work together, you know, I think a lot of those instances of students trying to get out of work is when they get tired of listening to the teacher. But if they're not listening to the teacher, if they're listening to their peers and they're working with their peers and that the peers are the one teaching them, it alleviates so much of that stress for students. It makes it the class so much more accessible. You know, so that's one of the beauties of cooperative learning. It just lessens these outbursts by students. These outbursts generally are the result of just having to listen to a teacher over and over and over and over again. They get tired and they don't want to listen to the teacher anymore. When you limit the amount of, you know, teacher-led instruction and you maximize the amount of interactions with peer-to-peer, you know, you're going to have better results. You know, in terms of learning extensions, you know, following today's lesson, students will come to class tomorrow prepared to go over the skill of sequencing order of events, its purpose in developing an understanding of the topic, and create visual depictions of this topic as a way to prepare for the following day's exam. That's what will come next. Following up, throughout the week, students will make connections to previously conducted activities and learning content. Daily learning objectives will be posted on the board, and students will engage in whole group discussion on why these objectives are important and how they further their understanding of a topic. So, you know, this is a long explanation for this lesson, but, you know, at the end of the day, this is the reteaching, this is the reinforcement, this is the practice that's, you know, as a teacher, you need to begin assessing student competence, and this is, you know, one way to do it, that you're allowing this gradual release of, you know, the teacher helping them, their peers helping them, their group helping them, and then it becomes them doing it themselves. You know, and you know, it's easy to pick out students who really, you can figure out who's really struggling when you do these sorts of activities. When you're scaffolding the lesson so much that, you know, 95% of the class gets it, it allows you really to step in as the teacher and help that 5% that's not getting it still. You know, I'm just thinking back to one random lesson from the year where I did this same structure, where I had this same gradual release of work to the students. And, you know, immediately it was apparent that, you know, there were 2 or 3 students that were really struggling with the independent practice, that when it came down for them to do it themselves, they were really, you know, taken aback by it. So I was able to pull them to the side, work with them one-on-one, you know, frame questions for them. And a lot of times just doing that was enough to get them back on track and get their minds activated. A lot of times it's overwhelming. Oh, I have to do this all myself. No. But then all it takes is, you know, hey, well, what is going on in the story? Who is the main character? What do they do first? Then what do they, and it's just you sounding out those questions for the students initiates that line of thinking that they need to be successful. So that's my evaluation of this lesson. That was a very long video. Hopefully you didn't get too bored, but yeah, I can't wait to read everyone else or hear about everyone else's lesson.